Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.
Trolling. Does the whole thing leave you confused? You don't know how fast to go, how far to put your lure back? Well, stick with me and I'll try and answer some of those questions. G'day, Starlo here, and welcome to another Tuesday YAK chat. Recently I had a great question from a viewer asking me about how you work out how fast you need to go when you're trolling. I also had a few questions about how far back to put your lures behind the boat when you're trolling. So I thought I'd dive in and have a look at the whole topic of trolling in this episode. But first, some housekeeping. What I'm talking about here is trolling with an O, not trawling with an A-W. Sorry, but it's a bit of a pet hate of mine, and I flinch every time I hear someone call it trawling. That's something you do with big nets behind a trawler. Dragging a lure on a line is trolling. Okay, now that I've got that off my chest, back to trolling. Anyone who follows my stuff will know that I'm not a huge fan of trolling. I don't do a heck of a lot of it. And that's no reflection on trolling. It's a reflection on my personal desires. I just don't enjoy it as much as some other styles of fishing. But when I'm in the kayak, I love having a lure out the back. You're only ever travelling fairly slowly. You might as well have a lure in the water wherever you're going. And that's one of the major forms of trolling that I do. Particularly in these Tuesday chats, I've usually got a lure out the back if I'm not casting one. And that way I'm covering water and I'm in with a chance of catching a fish. But how do you know how fast to go and how far to put your lure back? Well, it's a fairly inexact science, but to be honest, it's not that hard either. The first thing I always do when I'm going to troll is that I take the lure that I'm going to use, put it in the water beside the boat or the kayak, and move along at the speed that I think is going to be about right for my trolling. And I look at that lure in the water, see what it's doing. Is it swimming well? Has it got a good action? Is it staying in the water? Am I going too slow and just turning it into a dead piece of plastic or timber? Or am I going too fast and threatening to make it jump out of the water? And once I'm happy with how it's swimming, well, I think I've found the right trolling speed. And that's the speed I need to maintain with the lure while I'm actually trolling. But there's a couple of other factors come into consideration. Wind speed and current are two really major ones. If you find a speed or a rev range on your outboard that's making your lure do exactly the right thing, and then you start pushing into a fairly strong headwind, naturally enough, your boat's not going to move as fast at that same rev setting. So you actually need to speed up a little bit when you're pushing into the wind to maintain that same lure action. Conversely, if there's a strong current flowing and you're going with it, you might need to speed up as well, because what you really need to be thinking about is the actual speed of the lure in relation to the water around it. And if you're trolling at 3 knots but the water's moving at 2 knots, effectively your lure is only doing 1 knot, so it's probably died. It's got no action. You need to speed up a bit. Turn around and go into the current, and exactly the opposite applies. If you've got a 2 knot current and you're doing 3 knots, your lure is effectively doing 5 knots in relation to the water. If the water's moving fast enough, you might actually be able to troll a lure without even moving the boat. And I've done that at anchor sometimes in a strong current. So think about all those things. It's not overly complicated, but you do need to think about what you're doing. And I just can't get across to you how important it is to look at that lure in the water and make sure that it's behaving properly. How far back behind the boat or the kayak? That's another question that I get asked all the time, and a lot of people seem to think, oh, I need the lure way, way back there so the fish aren't getting scared by the boat. Well, to a certain extent that can be right, but I tell you what, out in the blue water scenarios, I've caught fish trolling lures literally in the prop wash with the double line and leader barely outside the rod tip. In those situations, I think your boat actually acts as a big fish attraction device and can pull fish in, particularly predatory things like tuna and wahoo, even some of the billfish. Sure, in quiet environments like the one I'm in this afternoon, it can pay to get a little bit further back, but you still don't want to overdo it. Think about how far you cast on an average cast, and that's probably about where you want your lure to be, maybe a little bit further, but not much further than that. There's an idea that if you let the lure further out, not only will you have less chance of spooking the fish, but you'll also make the lure run deeper, particularly if it's a floating diving lure. And again, that's true up to a certain point, but it then becomes a negative-sum game, because if you let too much line out, it doesn't make the lure go deeper at all. In fact, it may even make it run shallower with that huge belly of line out there. So play around with those things. The best way to tell what depth your lure is running at is when you start bumping the bottom with it. I do a lot of trolling in 2 to 5 metres of water, and I try and pick a lure that'll get down fairly close to the bottom and make occasional contact with it without constantly shoveling through the bottom. And if I am constantly shoveling through the bottom and picking up weed and scraps of stuff, then I'll change over to a different lure, or I'll shorten up the amount of line I've got out between the rod tip and the lure, and I'll get the tip up higher to make that lure run not quite as deep. Just think about what you're doing. It's really, like I said, not that technical, but there are a few things that you can do that'll dramatically improve your strike rate. One of them, I reckon, is to hand hold your outfit rather than just sticking it in a rod holder and forgetting all about it, as a lot of people do tend to do when they're trolling. By holding it, you can feel what's going on. You'll feel the strikes, you can react to them. And the other thing is you can actually work the lure. You can work that rod tip and make the lure not just track along straight, but actually jink a little bit, pause, float back up, dive again. Those are the kind of things that incite strikes when you're trolling. So I reckon hand holding is a really, really good way to go when you're trolling. All right, I'll get this one out there and we'll start doing a little bit of trolling today. You know, even though I said it's not my favourite technique for fishing, it's a very, very good way to find fish in a lot of situations. You can cover a lot of water, you can keep your lure down at a good running depth, keep it in front of fish. It can be a great way to locate fish that you can then cast to or jig to or whatever, if you don't enjoy trolling all that much like I don't. So use it as a fish finding tool. Another thing worth thinking about is if there's 2 or 3 of you in the boat, troll different lures, different running depths, slightly different actions, different size profiles and colours. Find out what's working best on the day. It can get a little bit tricky if you've got multiple lines out behind a boat, particularly if you're manoeuvring. It's easy to cross those lines over and tangle up. One of the best ways to avoid that is to make sure that the lures are all at different distances behind the boat. Make an M or a W out of your trolling pattern, and even then, just make your turns fairly gradual and watch your line. It can be really advantageous to have fluorescent line that you can see in the air between the rod tip and the water. You'll immediately see if the 2 lines cross over, and you can do something about it straight away before you get a really bad tangle. If you are trolling multiple lines and you get a hook up on one, it's best to get the other lines in fairly quickly. But what will happen a lot of times is you'll get a multiple hookup, and that can be pretty hectic. Nothing like having 3 or 4 fish hooked up when there's only 2 of you in the boat. You need to think about those things too before you decide how many lures you're going to put out. As I said, I picked this topic today, trolling, in response to questions from viewers, and I'd love you to ask me some questions and make some suggestions about what you'd like to see me cover in these Tuesday chats. I'm loving doing them, and I'm loving answering some of your questions and bringing you topics that you're obviously interested in, and I'm sure we won't run out of topics, but I'd love to hear your ideas on where you think we should go next. Like every episode of my Tuesday YAK chats, this one's brought to you by CM Partners Accounting, who do my accounting and bookwork, and I find them fantastic to work with. There's been quite a few changes in the recent budget about capital gains tax and trusts and things like that. So if you're looking for an accountant, if you're not happy with your current one, or you've never had an accountancy firm and you're looking to get one, check out CM Partners. Use my link down below and they'll give you a free consultation. Tell them Starlo sent you. All right, enough chat. Let's troll this lure and see what we can find. Well, so far it feels really good. It's not hitting the bottom. I know it's not particularly deep out here. As I've said before, I don't bother about electronics in my kayak anymore. It's rigged up to take a sounder, but I just found it annoying to have to keep a battery charged and to cart all that gear around with me, especially when I'm mostly fishing in shallow areas like this. There's a couple of different ways you can work out what the depth is. Use your lure as a depth sounder. Look over the side. Half the time I can see the bottom where I'm fishing, and when I lose sight of it, I know I've got beyond a certain depth. The other thing I regularly do is use my rod, poke it into the water, and feel the bottom. So I'm about that deep at the moment, a bit over a metre, probably 1.2 metres. If you do that in salt water, make sure you give your rod a good wash afterwards. Get the salt off the runners, the guides. They will corrode in the feet under the bindings otherwise. But, there's all kinds of ways of working out what depth you're in without having to have a sounder and electronics on board. But if you do want to have a sounder, that can be a really good thing too. So when I get my lure out there, now that I'm happy that it's swimming right, I've swum it beside the boat, chuck it out a cast, and then I'll make a couple of pedal strokes, let out a little bit more line, drop it into gear, hand hold it, work the lure, and hopefully I'll get a strike. The other thing about hand holding it is if you've got a lure with a reasonably strong action, a floating diving lure like the one I've got on at the moment, you'll actually feel it swimming. You'll see the vibrations in the rod tip and you'll feel it through the line, particularly if you're using braid, and you'll feel it through the rod. And if that vibration changes, it's a really good indication that you've picked up some weed or some other debris on the lure. Bring it in straight away and check it. These are things you miss if you've just got your rod in the rod holder. I hope you found some of that useful, and I hope I was able to answer some of those questions that I've been getting about trolling tactics. And until next time, when we catch up next Tuesday, this is Starlo wishing you tight lines.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.